All right, good evening. This is the meeting of the Community Preservation Committee scheduled for Wednesday, January 12th, 2021, beginning at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. I am Peter Pingator, the chair of the Community Preservation Committee. We are meeting remotely, and in order to facilitate that, I am going to first confirm that all members participating in this meeting and others who are anticipated to participate in the meeting are present and can hear me. So let me start with members of the committee and then I'll move on to staff. Joe Barnes. Let's just see if Joe can hear me. All right, well, let's see if he can log in. Let's see if he can. Can we send Joe a text to tell him that we can't hear him?
Sure.
And then okay. Artie Crocker.
Here.
Okay. Bob Dermody.
Here.
Lauradorfman.
Here.
Reg Foster.
Here.
Chris Gerstle.
Present.
Jean McKnight.
Here.
And Rick Zimbo.
Here.
And as I said, I'm Peter Pingator. I trust you can all hear me. Staff. Cecilia Simchak.
Here.
And our recording secretary, Kristen Wright.
Here.
Okay, let's make one last stab at getting Joe Barnes in on the action here. Joe Barnes. All right, what we'll do is I'll note for the record when Joe does join us. Okay, we have a quorum present and we will begin. First, we are meeting remotely. We continue to be under the COVID state of emergency. And so this meeting is being conducted by video conference consistent with the Massachusetts open meeting law and pursuant to Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, as extended by legislative action to, I believe, April 15th of 2022. The order allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of this meeting. The public can follow along with the deliberations of this meeting by consulting the agenda, which has been posted with the town clerk's office, which has a Zoom meeting remote address. As I said, we're meeting by Zoom app. The meeting is being recorded. Some attendees are participating by video conference, so be aware that other folks may be able to see, and take care not to screen share your computer. As far as the meeting materials, you should have all of them with you, and they should be posted on the website unless we note at some point during the meeting. The public is encouraged to follow along by following the agenda, and I will follow the agenda unless otherwise noted. Our ground rules. I'll introduce speakers. After the speaker concludes his or her remarks, I will ask each member, going in alphabetical order, to pose questions or make comments. And then we'll go through, give everyone an opportunity to ask questions, make comments, and then we do kind of a rapid fire. Whoever's hand goes up first gets to be called on. Be sure, in order that our transcript is clean, to make sure that either I or you announce your name before you make a statement so that we know for the record who is speaking. And please hold your comments until I call on you. Remember to mute your computer as necessary when you're not speaking. Speak clearly as you always do. And just a note, pursuant to the remote meeting rules, all votes will be by roll call vote. All right, so that concludes our introductory remarks. Chairman's updates are the next item on the agenda. I have two updates. One is that so Jean McKnight and I have been on tour talking to our stakeholder committees and commissions about our interest in updating the community preservation plan. Since our last meeting, we have been before the Conservation Commission, which Artie Crocker arranged. And we were before the Historical Commission, which Lauradorfman arranged. And so what I've done, I think we're looking at something like a 60 to 90-day turnaround by the stakeholder commissions and committees to provide their updates to their particular sections of the, or proposed updates to their particular sections of the plan. I'm pretty confident that we were before Park and Rec before our last meeting, but Chris Gersel arranged for that, and that was a live meeting. But socially distanced, appropriately so, held at the Rosemary Pool Complex. Other item that I want to note is we did circulate this red line version of the CPA plan. And we're just trying to drive this forward. I think ultimately our goal is to have the plan as amended and any application changes that we want to make ready to roll by September, when applicants are pulling the application, September or so, when applicants are pulling the application. But in that time period, we want to get feedback from all the committees. We have to go before FinCom. We have to have a public hearing. And so I would say, take a look at the CPA plan that Rick and I took a stab at redlining. I think that Gene is going to be looking at it as well. And so it's a red line version. If you have any comments on it, think about, taking a stab at it. You don't need to even do it by red line. You can actually send notes if you'd like, okay? That's it from the CPA updates. And then tonight, we're going to begin with our applicants' presentations. And what we have done in terms of scheduling is we are going to have the Needham Housing Authority present all 4 of its applications tonight. And we're going to have, I think, our NHA, the NHA chair and a representative to the CPC is Reg Foster. And I think what I'll do is turn it over to Reg. Before I do so, let me just ask this. Does anybody have any questions up to this point in terms of what you have in front of you, documents, etc.? Do you feel comfortable that we're ready to hear the presentations? That's my open question. I'll take any questions or comments from anyone. Ready? Okay, Reg, you've got the rock.
Thank you very much. And thank you for having me tonight. Cecilia, we have 3 guests with us. So if you wouldn't mind promoting them, Margaret Moran of the Cambridge Housing Authority, Natalie Jansen, also of the Cambridge Housing Authority, and Angie Medeiros, our Executive Director at the Needham Housing Authority.
All right, I promoted them all and made it so that whenever you want to start sharing your screen, you should be able to.
That was my next question. So let me, we didn't test this before, which is always a little risky, but let me see. Let's do a test that's desktop. I want that. So this little, everybody can see that okay? Is it large enough?
Good.
Good? Okay,
Yep.
Thanks.
Great.
Okay, so let me just turn this off for a second. First, I'd like to introduce our guests here, starting with Angie Medeiros, who is our Executive Director. She's been with us for 2.5, going on 3 years, but under the COVID pandemic situation, we're actually giving her double time for time and grade here. I guess we get 2 COVID pandemic spikes here. Angie, can you just wave everybody so they know who you are down there, bottom of my screen there. And then I also have with me Margaret Donnelly Moran, who is the principal of our consulting team from the Cambridge Housing Authority. She is also the director of planning, the Planning and Development Department there, which is a 25-person department that does nothing but the sort of things that we're going to be talking about a lot tonight. She's got over 30 years of experience, many other housing authorities, but most importantly, she was one of the lead consultants in the 2008 redevelopment of 20 units at High Rock Estates into 40 units of duplexes that we now call High Rock Homes. So Margaret, can you wave so everybody knows? Margaret has a fancy screen background, which is, I believe, one of the facilities at the Cambridge Housing Authority. So one of these days, I'm going to learn how to do that. And Natalie Jansen, Natalie, would you wave here, over there, is our project manager. So she's responsible for all the day-to-day activities. And she's a senior project manager at the Cambridge Housing Authority. She's done this sort of thing before for the Cambridge Housing Authority and also for some of their other clients, local housing authority clients like ourselves. So it's just been great to have her. She's a graduate of the Harvard University School of Design, Graduate School of Design, has 5 years of experience and been involved in all stages of these sorts of projects for housing authorities, from pre-development all the way through construction closing. So we've all been working as a team, and I guess everybody I think already knows about Angie Medeiros, our executive director, and we've all been working together as a team pretty much since July, when we selected them as our winning consultant after going through a competitive process last spring. Of course, last spring, we didn't think we were going to have another pandemic. That wasn't kind of in the game plan, but here we are. So Peter and the committee, what I propose that we do is everybody's received the packet we put together. And what I'd like to do is to just go through it one section at a time, kind of present it, and then pause for questions. If that sounds like a good way to proceed. Is that okay with everybody? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead. You folks have had your packets distributed to you by Cecilia, and I'm going to see if I can make this work again. So this is just the first page of the packet. Of course, like any of these sorts of things, I immediately started seeing typos in the packet the day after I sent it to Cecilia. And I've been, welcome any oopses and anything as we go along, because what we'll do is we'll fold that in to a revised version that we'll get out to Cecilia for the committee here. So we're going to start with, we did introductions. We're going to do authority to proceed next. And I might also say that
Reg, our
yeah.
screen share doesn't appear to be showing the entire document.
Okay, great. Let me make some adjustments here. I was trying to put it back up here. How's that? Does that show? Make it a little smaller. I wanted to make it large enough so the audience can see. How's that for size right there?
It's fine.
Good. Okay. So this section number 2, authority to proceed, as I regard as sort of housekeeping. And I just wanted to, I presume people have had a chance to read through this. You know, I put down the basics here, which is how we were created by special town meeting in 1948. And I've quoted the section out of Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 121B, Section 3, that caused us to come into existence. And then I've added here some excerpts from Chapter 121B on the powers of a housing authority. These are not all our powers, but they're particularly the ones that apply to us. And you can read those for yourself. But that's, you know, where we get the authority to do projects like this. That is redevelopment projects. Another question that comes up is who is the owner of record on all our properties? And the answer is us. And I haven't really submitted detailed information on this. Maybe it's not, you know, somebody will think it's needed. But any of you who are familiar with the Needham Assessor's Office database, never used it for anything, you can go in there and look up Needham Housing Authority, and you can get all our properties and the books and pages of all the records associated with them, if you want to go into that amount of detail. The fourth thing I've added here, just for the record, is last November's Needham Housing Authority board meeting. We voted to submit these 4 applications. This is just an excerpt quote from the minutes. And so now we can begin. Now I started, by the way, does anybody have any questions about any of that? Hearing none, I will go on. So I started off with section 3 here, with just page 1 of the executive summary of the 2019 NHA Facilities Master Plan, which has been our Bible since we completed that 2 years ago, going on 3 years ago, actually. And it was funded by CPA funds. Thank you very much. And it has been enormously helpful in getting us here today. And the reason I call your attention to this is twofold. One, I put an active link up here at the top. If you don't have a copy and you want to get one, I've discovered when I was preparing that this page had wandered off to page 10. It was supposed to, it was supposed to be right after this page, but this is the table of contents. And, almost anything you want to know by way of drilling down in the detail in our existing facilities is in there with pictures and descriptions and so forth. And this has wandered, see, I've do that. And so, assuming there are no questions on that, I just want to come to this very busy slide and spend a minute or two on it here. This is sort of an attempt that I've been perfecting over a little bit of time to kind of summarize what the facilities master plan recommended that we do and what comprises what we've come to call the modernization and redevelopment initiative. And so here on what basically was recommended in 2019 is 5 projects. The first one is focused on our Seabeds Cook, Seabeds Way and Captain Robert Cook properties. This gives you a summary that it has 46 senior disabled apartments, 1-bedroom apartments in it. It has 30 family apartments, 2, 3, and 4 bedrooms. And it shows that after we do our work in the initiative, and this is that we will still have the same number of units. It shows what the total estimated cost of that work was in 2019. Those numbers are undoubtedly gone up due to all the construction inflation that we know about in the last 2 or 3 years. But this is our benchmark, or sort of our baseline in 2019. And then it also projected how much over here on the right of CPA funds might be needed, which brings us here tonight, partially. So about 320,000. And if we spend that sort of money, and it's detailed in the master plan, we could expect to attract somewhere in the vicinity of $16 million of external funding. That means non-Needham taxpayer funding. And then what I've done over here on the right is added a column since the last time I did this for the, I think it was the Select Board and League of Women Voters presentation. And here I've mapped in the CPA funding request that you have in front of you. So the 2301, this one here, actually covers projects number 1, 2, and 3. And I will get into the reason why that exists in more detail in a minute. But in summary, these are all our federally subsidized properties. These are apartment units where the difference between what our tenants can afford to pay and what it costs to run the place is made up by money from HUD, from the federal government. So that project number 1 was the Seabeds Way, Robert Captain Robert Cook, and it was basically to modernize and preserve those units. And I'll go into more detail in a minute. The number 2 and 3, we broke it up into 2 phases in the facilities master plan, but we're looking at it right now as one project that would be done in phases for the time being, was to do more of that redevelopment in the High Rock neighborhood. That's where we took in 25, 28 to 28, we took 20 dilapidated bungalows, cottages is what Gene McKnight likes to call them, and turned them into 20 duplexes sitting on the same plots of land. These are roughly all the same in the sense of their construction, and each one is sitting on a 10,000 square foot plot of land. And so this project is basically to do more of the same, to take the 60 remaining duplexes and turn 60 remaining bungalows and turn them into 60 duplexes. So this is where it shows that, you know, those 60 old units become 120 family units here. So it gives you, again, the before and after information at a summary level here. And then again, as before, it says if we predict in 2019, and this is going to get sharpened a great deal more this year, that we would need about $1.5 million of Needham CPA funds, you know, to catalyze bringing in something in the order of nearly $45 million non-Needham taxpayer dollars to get those projects done. Again, recognizing that we probably now, these are a significant underestimate of the construction costs that we will be looking at next year or the year after that. So these three projects are all tied to what we will be talking about in CPA funding application number 1, because the kinds of things that we need to do in order to create this modernization and or redevelopment are similar, and all are pointed at federal programs that have funding capability. The 4th project here is Linden Chambers. And Linden Chambers is 152 units of senior and disabled housing across the street from the High Rock School. It's a redevelopment project. Right now we're looking at it as at least replacing those 152 units, which is required. You can't wind up with any fewer units than you start with here. But we're also, as we start to look at it, there is the potential of doing a bit more density there, maybe in the 220 unit range. And that is all tied to the second CBA funding request in front of you that we'll get into more depth for 1.2 million, which is to really get going on this initiative. More to be said in a moment here. The 5th project that was identified in the master plan is not part of our discussion today or this year, but just for the record, it was determined during the master planning process that we have enough land over at the Seabeds Cook site. It's a 10.7 acre site. We have enough land so that it is a possibility of building another 61 unit senior housing building there. And again, conceptually speaking, that would, on an estimated basis, might take as much as another $1 million of CPA, Needham CPA funded in the future in order to leverage these funds coming in from non-Needham taxpayer sources here. So if you look at this before and after column here, what this then sums down to here is sort of an overall snapshot of the vision of the Modernization Redevelopment Initiative. And that is that, we would go from a total of 336 units to a total of 457 units. That would be a 36% increase over the next, we're looking at this as a 5 to 10 year initiative here. And then these, of course, sum up the story that, approximately $5 million of CPA funds, as we looked at the world 3 years ago, could leverage an outside investment of, over $125 million in order to basically accomplish the overall goal of completely modernizing and or redeveloping all of our existing units and adding additional units while we're at it. And then I've added to this something that wasn't explicitly contemplated in the facilities master plan, and that is to purchase and redevelop East Militia Heights Drive property. We'll talk about that. And we put in a placeholder CPA funding application of $1.5 million for that. And then this last item was contemplated in the 2019 facilities master plan in chapter 9, which has a bunch of recommendations for how to proceed, but wasn't broken out explicitly as a funding item. And that is to bring on board this year another unit of senior leadership for the Housing Authority as we go down the road for doing that. And again, we'll get into the reasons for that when we get to that application. There is also here in the fine print that with the asterisk that said, this is 2019, this is very conceptual. All of this is already starting to evolve, but it is our baseline and our guide plan for the path down which we have been going. So I'm just going to stop there again before and the next slide, I'll be getting into the specific applications and see if there's any questions or comments from the CPC committee members here.
Peter, this is Rick Zimbone.
Okay, Rick.
Peter, Reg, I'm just looking at this chart. If you look at the CPA funding request on the right-hand side, is that 62.5 thousand the correct number? I thought that's gone up a little bit.
Yeah, and I didn't change it from, in fact, I think that's a typo here. So thank you very much. It is actually 112. It's actually 112,805. So I actually have my Word version. Let's call it 113K. See, it says 113K. Thank you very much, Rick.
Not a problem. It'll adjust your totals as well, but I wouldn't worry about it.
Yeah, I will get that later. Okay, so I'll just highlight that.
Yeah, I think, and just for the purposes, I just wanted to make sure it was clarified. With respect to timing, you've got a lot of material to go through, and we don't want to be here.
Thank you.
12 hours.
And I should also say that Rick and Laura and Chris had a almost 2-hour meeting last Thursday where they were very helpful in getting my act together for this presentation. So thank you very much. So yellow, here we go. Real-time editing. So any other questions, by the way, or typos? All right, moving along. So here I actually did remember to change that slide. I forgot to change the previous slide. But the headline is that the numbers that we thought we estimated the cost of this work, what we estimated in November turned out to be significantly more for reasons that we're going to get into. But first of all, let me just walk through this. That, as I said before, this focuses on our federally subsidized properties. I also sort of call it the low-hanging fruit from time to time, because we know there's funding out there. there's a very well blazed trail to getting the funding. It's relatively quick by the standards of doing these sorts of things. And it was the recommendation very early on, the early days last summer, of the Cambridge Housing Authority, that we should get these going and get the applications in ways that we're going to lay out for you a little bit more. What is the problem? Well, these buildings are not tear downs, but they were built 40 years ago, and they are in significant need of a complete makeover. Sometimes I call it a gut renovation, just for normal reasons, normal wear and tear, but also because there's been years, we've been on starvation funding from the federal government, and there's years of deferred maintenance. And also those of us who go back to the big snowstorm in 2015, that's when we got the 100 inches of snow, might remember that there was a catastrophe there where the ice dams really damaged a number of our buildings in Seabed's Way. And when we looked at the situation, we discovered that there were some construction defects when those buildings were built in 1980. Terrible mistakes that came to light because of that ice dam problem. And we also discovered that the same problem exists with the Captain Robert Cook buildings, which are built about the same time. So again, the goal is total gut renovation and basically preserving this deeply affordable housing for another 40 plus years. That's the goal there. In High Rock Estates, I've spoken to as well. That's what we call the 60 units that are the bungalows, the cottages up in the High Rock neighborhood. These are built as housing, post-World War II housing for returning service families. They are over 70 years old. They're really sort of beyond their useful lifetime. They suffer from the same years of deferred maintenance and capital improvements, partly because even though they're federally subsidized now, that only started in 2013. And prior to 2013, they were state subsidized since 1951 when they were originally built. And so, our master plan analysis is these are basically tear downs, the way we did with the High Rock Estates redevelopment. And the goal is to follow that trail that was blazed 15 years ago. I've said the funding is available. We've worked with Cambridge Housing Authority since last summer. There's a preliminary analysis that's been provided to the liaisons that in draft form says, by running the numbers based on what we know now, the funding is there. How does it work? It's something, you'll hear this term from time to time called repositioning. What does that mean? Well, my simple answer is there are four, we are on a current funding program that was basically created in the late 1930s. And there are four other funding programs with a sort of a alphabet soup of acronyms and names that I'm not going to get into that we could also take advantage of. And if we reposition our funding stream from that old 1937 program, public housing program, to the alphabet soup programs, a combination of one or more of those four, we get a lot more money. And in that initial analysis that I spoke of, there's 30 pages that demonstrate that based on preliminary analysis, we would see something like, adding another another 1 million, $1.4 million to our annual operating income, just for better subsidy from the federal government. And we also creates the ability, because of the way it's different, of being able to use our capital assets for debt to support debt and our new funding stream to support debt, and in the tune of somewhere in the order of 18 to 22 million. So that's where the money will come from to do the gut renovation from Seabeds and Cook. And then, again, there's huge amount of additional complicated detail to that, to which, and we provided some of it to our liaisons, and it's available to anybody who wants to get into it. Laura was particularly interested in it, given her work at Dedham Bank, and we welcome her in understanding more about it. But that's where the money comes from. And in order to get the money, we need to do a number of pre-development analyses of the property conditions, the existing property conditions at Seabeds Way, at Captain Robert Cook, and at High Rock Estates. And then we also need to have a site survey, just of the land for Seabeds and Cook, the 10.7 acres there. We already have one that was funded in 2013 for the Linden Chambers and High Rock area. That was for an earlier CPA grant. That's up to date enough so that we can use that for the funding applications. And it's not only used for the funding applications, but the way the financial reengineering magic works, as I understand it, and Margaret Moran and Natalie are here to correct me immediately if I stick my foot in something or say something wrong, or to answer more further questions. But as I understand it, you go in there and you say, I need $10 million to fix all these things and bring everything up to 21st century standards and code for the Seabeds Way property, and likewise for the Captain Robert Cook property, and likewise for the High Rock Homes Estates properties. And then that goes into the application and helps determine how much funding you can get out of the federal government if you reposition your properties. So that's where, and this is, these numbers came in considerably higher than we thought they were going to when we put in the application at the end of November. And we can get into the reasons for that if people want to drill down. There is a sort of bullet point summary of what the scopes of services of these 4 engagements involve. But we've also provided to the liaisons, anybody else who wants to look at them, the detailed scopes of services that were put out last November, and the actual signed bids that we have received to date for all of these efforts, and what the architects or the engineers or the surveyors bid for this particular work. So these numbers that we have up here represent signed bids that we have received. And the total cost has now gone up from to $225,610, and we're seeking CPA funding still for the 50% of it, with the other 50% being covered by Needham Housing Authority cash reserves that we've been keeping in our bank account since the High Rock Homes redevelopment. There was a developer's fees that was received as a result of that. And the explicit strategy for receiving that developer fee in 2005, 2008 is so that we could use it as seed money for doing things like what we're starting to do this year. I guess, yeah, I did add here are the reasons why the costs were higher. I did, and then, we got the questions and answers here. So I abstracted what I'll call the project-specific questions and answers for the slide, and put the answers here. And then in Appendix C is the form that Cecilia sent out with the generic question answers as well, which are at the bottom of your packet. I'm not planning to go over those in detail. I think it would be better if anybody has any questions about what we sent out, to pose those questions either today or in a future meeting here. But the three specific questions we were asked is, can you provide the scopes of services? And we have done that and done it once better, which is the bids, the signed bids are in there as well. The second question is, are there any alternative sources of funding? And the answer is basically not. It is conceivable that we would spend down our cash reserves more and postpone capital improvement projects and free up some cash to do it. But the Needham Housing Authority Board and the executive director do not think that's a good idea to do. We are comfortable with the level of money that we put in, and we've checked it out with our fee accountant, and was that person's recommendation as well. And the third question was similar to the first, which is, how much did the site survey, how much would it cost? And again, you've got that number, you've got a signed bid for that work, tied to a proposal with the detailed specs of what that company would do for us. So that's the first application. I think we're ready to open the floor to Q&A.
Okay, that's kind of my job. So first, does any of the staffers and consultants that the Housing Authority are here with us tonight, do they have any comments with respect to FY 2023-01? Anything to add? And I guess you'll be here and you'll be available to answer questions. And so I guess what we'll do is we've got a lot of material in front of us, and we've had, a lot of us have had an opportunity to review it. So I think what I'll do is just kind of, instead of going in alphabetical order down the committee, I'm going to just toss it out and say, why don't you raise your hand if you have questions with respect to the presentation on FY 2023-01 site survey existing conditions report. Questions? Mr. Dermott. Unmute.
Unmuted, sir. Thank you. Thanks, Reg, for the info presentation. And if you covered this, forgive me, but can you elaborate a little bit more on the potential new building and how that fits in, like the 10-acre site you mentioned up at Seabeds, I think it is, and how, like, if that doesn't happen, will other things still go ahead or vice versa? Is one dependent on the other? Because I think that's a very different animal, right? New construction versus maintenance. So that's kind of.
I want to point out, if I may, that's not within, that's not part of this application. I just want to let you know that I just want to, and it may come up in a general question, but just, and that's fine. But just kind of bear in mind that we're trying to, we're dealing with site survey on these 4 properties, but just bear that in mind. But and I think that project isn't even part of the 4 applications that are part of that.
Okay, question withdrawn. Thank you.
Okay.
I could give a 1-sentence answer if that's okay, Peter.
Sure.
So Peter's right and you're right, Bob. It's not, I didn't present anything on it because it's not part before us tonight. But we will be very definitely bearing in mind what we might want to be doing with that future project when we do this current work.
Great, thank you.
All right, and I actually have a question, which is, if I may, does anyone else have any other questions? So
Mr. Zambone has his hand up.
Oh, I didn't see that. Rick.
That's okay, Peter.
Oh, yeah.
I'm still trying to learn how to put my hand up and take it down in this process. I'll get it in another year. Reg, as you and I have talked, I went through the bids and then I discussed them a bit with you, and perhaps we can have some input from the Cambridge Housing Authority. But could you put back up your your screen share there for just a quick moment?
Sure. I think I know what you're going to ask about, so let me put that up right there.
Yeah,
This. Share. There you go. Is that what you're looking for?
it is. And under number 3, it says pre-development analysis prerequisite, bids received. Let's just focus on the first one for the time being, the Seabeds Way Property Conditions Report. But the question really applies to all 4 of those bullets. There's a price there for $70,950. You add all the 4 numbers up, you get to the total for the project for this application. Half of which will be funded through the CPA, the other half will be yours. And when Peter and I had a discussion, I asked him if he wouldn't mind breaking down that $70,950. And he sent me back a response, and basically it was out of that, we'll just keep it at that $70,950.
Yep.
There was $59,000 was the actual bid that you received. There was $5,500 in estimated expenses, and then $6,450 for the Cambridge Housing Authority administrative fee, which is 10% of whatever cost we have. And so my question to Peter, and really it's for the purposes of this, is we're going to be going to town meeting for a specific dollar amount for this project. And in this particular situation, we cover the fees, the estimated expenses, and then the admin fee. However, there's certain limitations and requirements as outlined in the bid. It's a basic bid, and there may be some other activities that may occur over the course of the work that's being done on that. And my question to Reg, and actually to the Cambridge folks, is should we be including in that number a contingency factor for some unforeseen or unknown items that come up that require further analysis or further discussion? And I don't know what that is. Is it, 10%, 5%, 15, 20, whatever the number should be, because I don't think we want to be in a position where we have to go back to town meeting and ask for more money if we don't have sufficient funds allocated for this particular application when we approve it. And so that additional scope may come up in any one of the properties that we're looking at, either Seabeds, Cook, the High Rock properties. So I just throw that out as a question because it may change the cost of the particular application. So, and as I said, Reg and I have already talked about this. So.
Margaret, do you want to go ahead and
Yeah,
address
I
that?
was just I was doing the same thing, trying to unmute myself. So we worked really hard to try to create as comprehensive a scope with the architectural team and the various sub-consultants to try to limit the likelihood of let's say surprises. But that said, I've been in the business long enough to know that when you think there's not going to be a surprise, you end up being surprised. And I think the one area where, I would potentially see the need for additional work would be if they came back and said that there was a need for kind of more physical investigations. And I think Needham Housing Authority, based back from the bad winter, and was it 2013 or 2015, experienced the significant ice dam issue at Seabeds that then led to a very comprehensive study at Captain Robert Cook that kind of, to me, covers that potential contingency, because it's already explored kind of some of the hidden conditions that you can't see without kind of removing walls and doing things like that. And so it made me feel that we had a good scope that would capture the information that we would need to allow the housing authority then to make the final decisions on how best to slot the properties for the federal repositioning. So I didn't feel strongly about the need of contingency, but I absolutely appreciate the question and have had experience having the need for contingency.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I guess I would have framed that question as I know there's no contingency, and so what's the reason for that? We kind of you've given us a detailed answer on that. I guess the follow-up question would be, in the unlikely event that there are some contingency expenses, is it something that a housing authority is prepared to cover? And because I think Rick's concern is he wants to fund a project that's actually going to be completed. So that's really, I think, really what his core concern would be, as opposed to bumping up the cost of the project. I guess do we have a comfort level that there's not going to be a contingency, we've kind of factored it in, and B, in the unlikely event that there is, we're going to be able to cover that, housing authority?
So my suggestion on that, when Rick came up with the question last Thursday, was, we didn't really look into that deeply. When I say we, I meant Needham Housing Authority, executive director, and ourselves. And if it's okay with the committee, I'd like to take that question offline and do a little bit more of an analysis and a dive on the risk factors of what could go wrong. One thing we did talk about, for example, was do we need to do any drilling in the site? And we decided, no, we don't, but if you start having to drill holes and analyze, soil conditions, that could add a significant amount of additional cost. And there could be other things like that. So can we take that as perhaps an action item to get back to the CPC on time for the next meeting or something like that?
That's fine with me. I see Lauradorfman has her hand up.
So sorry about that. Just kind of a weird question that came to mind. Are there any risks regarding like underground oil tanks or any environmental things that are part of the due diligence or investigation in terms of working on that
Yeah, I
site?
mean, not specifically related to this physical conditions assessment, but as we move forward with planning for any kind of future construction and financing, we're going to need to do a phase 1 environmental study to highlight and identify not only potential environmental issues specific to the properties, but anything that's related to the adjacent properties as well that would have a threat to any of the Needham Housing Authority's properties. But that's a task that usually comes a little bit later in the process.
And is there a contingency amount for the cost of that study built into this?
And not for the purposes of this study, was to try to get a sufficient amount of information to allow us to do the application process to HUD for the repositioning. And as you go forward with then actually doing the actual implementation of that action, there'll be additional architectural and engineering and environmental study fees that at this point in time, we feel like we'll be able to absorb that cost within the project budget for Seabeds and for Captain Robert Cook.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions from the committee members concerning 2023-01? I have a question. With respect to the existing conditions report for High Rock Homes, what is the utility of that report if we are going to be demolishing the homes?
Margaret, do you want to take that?
Sure. So one of the, it's important for HUD to kind of quantify the existing conditions of the properties to determine how it relates to a calculation they make to what it relates to the total development cost if you were to build it new. And depending upon what that percentage is, it could make the property eligible for additional federal resources that would be, without having done the study of what the existing buildings calculate to, you wouldn't be able to have that information to determine if you qualify for those additional resources.
And just, well, I don't want to get too much in the weeds here, but so does that mean that is it roughly that the worst condition, the higher the likelihood that you're going to get some additional funding on the federal
Yeah,
side?
correctly. Yeah, they have a little calculation that says if you have a percentage of physical need at 30% of total development costs, 60% or 90%, each level gets something more valuable. And so what we're trying to do is benchmark High Rock Homes to at that 30, 60, 90 level. So if we can make the case to be at 90 to bring more resources, federal resources to the housing authority, that's kind of where we need to be. Or want to be, in terms of being able to maximize that potential for the housing authority.
And last comment, but you probably know, we had ARA money come into those. We spent ARA money in 2010, right, and 2012 to update the roofs in the kitchens and bathrooms. So
And I'll comment on that because, not many of the suburban housing authorities did that. And I remember when I heard Needham was doing it, I called up executive director at the time and said, smartest move. And the fact that you did that in 2010 makes High Rock Homes eligible for this federal repositioning. Now that will bring even additional resources to the community. So I'll just say, well done.
Yeah, that was, thank you. I was the chair at the time. And so if I succeeded at anything, it was that committee succeeded at anything, it was that. So yeah, that's a huge benefit. I think the committee and the town should know that we have a significant amount of federally subsidized of low-income housing, and that's going to inure greatly to our benefit.
Yeah, and even in the last 10 years, the fact that it was federal public housing meant the property got many more resources than it would have gotten out of the state program, which again, just by that definition was a real success as well.
Okay, I didn't ask that question to
No, well, I forgot. I didn't even realize you were the chair. So there you go.
Okay.
Peter,
Yes.
it's Rick again. Just for the benefit of the other committee members, in our meeting with Reg, the liaisons talked about, and he's in the process of developing a total project timeline for not only this particular application, but for the next application as well, which will take it in essence from cradle to grave. So we're starting now, and when will ultimately the funds be expended and the projects completed. And that's one of the items that we asked him to put together as part of his the presentation for town meeting, so that they get a sense, because I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that are interested in determining, when this might be available for people to use and utilize and gain the benefits of. So we've asked him to do that, and he's in the process of doing it.
Okay. Joe Barnes.
Just to follow up on Rick's comment or question, is there some timeline on the projects that are being presented? Have they been prioritized? Is the first project one that would be addressed first, or will they be addressed concurrently? They're very ambitious. There's a lot of money involved, but it appears as though it's a massive undertaking. And I might be getting ahead of myself here, but I'm just curious as to whether, in fact, there's a plan for a timeline where there's a priority for number one, and then number two, and number three, as they're listed in the application.
I'll start there and then I'll give it off to Margaret again. I'm putting back up that one slide, tells it all slide. Everybody see it okay?
Yep.
So basically, all these projects are high priority, from one point of view or another. Linden Chambers in particular has been a town priority for a long time. But we're starting with Seabeds Way, Captain Robert Cook, and High Rock, because that has the lowest hanging fruit. And we can get those going if we can get those applications in this summer or towards the fall, it sets in process a motion, it sets in motion a process that leads to this funding coming in. We definitely seem to qualify for it, and that would mean these projects would probably get going first. Again, this is all coming into focus right now, as in this first year of the project. Linden Chambers, which I'm about to get into, has been a very high priority of the town, but as I will about to get into, is the funding is just not there. We'll get into that some more in a moment, and so that's following as the next train moving out of the station, and then this new building, should we get there, is the third train to pull out of the station, and that also takes a long time to do. So that's the sort of level of priority that we have right now, and it's really driven by where the the sort of the old Wendy's commercial, where's the beef, and the beef right now is going after these federally subsidized developments and getting them repositioned. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
I feel bad here. We've been dancing around this 61 unit building, and Bob Dermody asked a question about, so why don't we, and now we're talking about timelines, so why don't we just talk roughly about what that is going to be? Because now we have a timeline. So let's answer Bob's question that I probably was a little preemptive in rolling out of order.
Well, I'm going to throw this over to Margaret. And Margaret, I did have those 0.1 versions of the timeline charts if you want to use them here that I can put up on the screen.
Well, none of the charts that we did really, gets at the additional units at Seabeds, because I think we see that as something that priority wise may come after trying to do something at Linden and Chambers and High Rock, though it's possible that once we have a plan for High Rock moving forward, that you would slot in Seabeds, or there might become an opportunity. We've got still pending a hope of pending federal legislation that would bring Build Back Better into focus, that may provide incentives or resources for affordable housing. And if nothing else in my career, I've been able to figure out how to get ready for funding and to be ready, or to make the case that we are ready for funding. And so, I think the facilities management report went a long way of really laying out opportunities for the housing authority, particularly to add new units on sites that they already control. And we would, move up a Seabeds project if financially we had the puzzle pieces to put together to fund them. But we also, could go through the schedules that the liaisons had asked for, because we did prepare those that kind of lay out kind of the steps associated with kind of the federal repositioning program, which we think is, as Reg said, is low hanging fruit, but it's very meaningful fruit in terms of bringing additional financial resources to the housing authority that could not only make a huge difference to the quality of the housing at the 3 federal properties, but may bring some resources that could really help Linden and Chambers, as well as the potential of even adding new units to the housing authority's portfolio. So it's whatever the pleasure of the committee is.
Well, we kind of whipped these Gantt charts together, and I think they could bear a little bit more thinking ourselves internally. And we do have a lot of other territory to cover.
Yeah,
so-
let's, why don't we put, you can bring that to us at a later date, and let's move on to FY 2023-02.
Okay, so let me screen share here. Get that going. And we will go to application number 2. So we started to touch on this already. This is the Linden Chambers redevelopment. Again, to repeat, these are our remaining state subsidized public housing units. Like Peter said, back when he was chair, all that High Rock was also state subsidized and was converted over. They were built in the late 50s and early 60s. There are 152 studio apartments on 8.2 acres. They are extremely small, 400 to 420 square feet per apartment, whereas the standard today is, more like a 585 square foot, 1-bedroom apartment for senior or disabled persons to live in here. There are some standards in many other ways in terms of accessibility. There's no elevators, handicapped access, wide doors. The property isn't used very efficiently in terms of the way things were constructed. Again, there's years of deferred capital improvements and maintenance, and worse than for our federally subsidized properties. The state generally provides more per unit, less per unit subsidy than the feds do by several $100s per unit per year. And so the goal is to completely tear down everything that's there eventually. This is not happening overnight. And any residents who are on the call today, the meeting today, this is not happening overnight. This needs to be planned for several years. And there will be a ton of resident input on how this could be done and the options we're considering. The funding we've been asking for is to basically proceed to the schematic design stage. And that means that you have a detailed set of plans and you've worked through a whole bunch of issues to figure out what is feasibly, reasonably possible on that property. And here's a sort of a breakout down of our estimates. It's really based on the experience, again, of the Cambridge Housing Authority team that we basically have outsourced and hired to be part of the NHA on what we expect it would cost to do various components of the work ahead. Again, the liaisons have a detailed scope of services that is just coming into focus. It's still very much in draft form. If we go forward with this work, it will be done again under the supervision of our CHA partners and the team there. I just want to call attention that in the back of the packet that you got the other day, Appendix B kind of lays out a bit more detail of Cambridge's experience, which, in some, they've been doing this sort of work for the past 10 plus years on their own aging inventory of public housing. And I believe the statistic is roughly, they've worked their way through approximately 2,000 units, basically doing the kind of things that we're talking about here at Linden Chambers or the previous project we just talked about. I just, for the record, would note, I moved to Needham in 2008. It was already a top priority in the 2004 community development plan. to do something about Linden Chambers. That was repeated in the 2007 Affordable Housing Plan. And I think as many of us or most of us know, the planning department and the planning board have launched an effort last fall to redo that 2007 plan and update it to a new 2022 plan. And I'm 99.9% certain that this Linden and Chambers redevelopment goal will be in there at the top of the priorities for that particular plan as well. Before I get into the questions and answers, I put in your packet, what do I mean by we just sort of have a conceptual plan? Well, this is probably the best of two of them. One of them was in the Facilities Master Plan 2019. You can look at it for yourself. And this is as far as we've got, which is some pretty drawings and some very high level conceptual thinking that says if we take the Linden and Chambers site, so just to orient you, this here is the playing fields for the High Rock School in this area. This is Linden Street running right along here. In this area is where the 72 studio apartments in 16 buildings are all sitting in this area here. Over here, this is the area where there are 4 two-story brick buildings and a 5th one over here with about 80 units in it. And this odd shaped piece, we have a sort of a, they're talking about gerrymandering right now in the news. We have this sort of gerrymandered property that we own. And at the time we said, oh, look, this is all wetlands down here. This is a little pond. Maybe we can put in some townhouses over here. These are the tracks for Needham Junction, the turnaround tracks, and down here in the blank areas where Roach Brothers is. So, and if we do that, we could maybe, get upwards of 220 or so units with this kind of configuration that would kind of look like this. So this is looking over the red dot shows where the viewpoint is. We're kind of looking over the baseball diamond at Linden Street here and build something really attractive and really nice, and that would be very consistent with the look and feel of the neighborhood. And here's another, elevation sketch, and with the idea that, and that was it. Yeah, I put a couple of them in there. There's a couple more. So that's, we know that's as far as we've got. And as Margaret said a few minutes ago, we to get any further, we need to really figure out a real plan for redeveloping this property. Now, we got questions, project-specific questions here. One is to provide a detailed description of the project and how this fits into the components of the design process. I think the scope of services document, even in its very initial first draft form, goes into that in a fair amount of detail. So I'm not going to cover that tonight. Then the second question is, well, it's the where's the beef question, which is, this project, we're probably talking about something that's closer to $100 million in today's construction costs to do the whole development over again and maybe add some more units. Where might that money come from? And the answer is, that's a good question. On one hand, Representative Denise Garlick has actually been magnificent in the last year in getting some additional funding earmarked for us for the Needham Housing Authority for capital improvements of our state-funded public housing. It totals up $2.75 million, and everybody's incredibly grateful to her, because this is a down payment that we can use in the future towards, if not getting the whole $100 million project done, maybe we can start off with a small chunk of it, like 40 units or something like that, and come up with a schematic design that says we can do it in 2 or 3 or 4 phases as we raise funding. Another answer is there's another set of alphabet soup programs that where the state provides funding for these sorts of redevelopment projects, but they aren't funded. They're very, very underfunded right now. And what little funding is there, it goes to much higher priority needs than the Needham Housing Authority. Apparently, there's a lot of state subsidized public housing out there that's in much worse condition than we are, and they're sort of first in line to get it here. And here's a list here of some other possible sources of funding. But one of the things we're going to be focusing on very intensely over the next year, and in parallel with doing the schematic design, is getting better answers to that question than we have today. And it's a chicken and the egg. We really can't get better answers until we have a much better idea of what we're doing, much better than this, that addresses all the issues of doing a real redevelopment project. So let me pause there and for Q&A, Peter.
Excuse me. So that completes the presentation by the proponents for FY 2023-02. Am I correct about that?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, and your team is available to answer questions, right?
Right.
All right. So, we'll just follow suit. I'm just going to take hands up, okay, and I'll try as best I can to respond. I see everybody's using that function. I don't know who is up first. Jean hasn't spoken yet, so Jean gets to ask the first question on FY 2023-02.
Yes, Linden Chambers is described as a redevelopment. In other words, the buildings will be torn down and rebuilt. And I want to know how you will handle temporary relocation.
Right.
And I had that question actually for the other project too that you described as substantial renovation. Will temporary relocation be required during the construction phase? And how will that be handled?
Did I throw that question to you, Margaret, because you've had a lot more experience with this very same issue, for every one of those 2,000 apartments that you redeveloped.
Yeah, I'm the queen of
What
relocation.
What are strategies for handling that sort of thing?
So the housing authority has a responsibility to the residents who would be impacted by any renovations. And for the sites at Seabeds and Captain Robert Cook Road, we don't know yet how disruptive the work will be and whether residents would need to be out of their units for 3 days while they're doing, a renovation to the kitchen or the bathroom area, or whether they would need to be out a couple of weeks. And so when we get into the details with understanding exactly what the scope of work will be, we'll be able to assess how disruptive it would be and what some of the options would be to help residents. In some instances, the strategy is to keep a couple of units vacant, and then you kind of do a little bit of a round robin where people move in temporarily into what we call like hotel units, but they're units on site. Sometimes, I've seen housing authorities, we have not done this in Cambridge, but I know housing authorities will rent, like if they've disrupted the kitchen or the bathrooms, they'll rent mobile trailers that have bathroom facilities that residents could use in the 3 to 5 days that their bathroom might be out of commission. But it will be very contingent upon what the scope of work is, and will be a very open and transparent process with resident engagement throughout and resident understanding about what the trade-offs are between doing some, if needed, limited moving around to accommodate the work to trying to do it with residents in place and the like. So you can either do it, with keeping residents in place to the maximum extent possible, or, try to maximize the value of them being out for a week or two to do the most disruptive work. But again, dependent at Seabeds and Captain Robert Cook. on what that final scope of work is. For Linden and Chambers, particularly Linden, where, you know, you're really looking to try to bring the units up to modern standards. And Reg was saying that the unit sizes are between 400 and 420 square feet. DHCD standards are about 600 square feet. So you're almost 40% undersized in terms of current conditions. And then there are a whole host of other problems. And I think what I'm thinking about is that if you can bite it off in phases and not do the entire project at once, but you do an instance where you might tear down 4 or 5 of the cottages at Linden Street, you know, that's 16 to 20 units. But what you're going to replace in that same square footage may have 40 to 50 units. And so that then becomes the resource for the people who would be coming in the next phase, you know, in terms of freeing up the spaces. And then how you get the initial, you know, whatever the number is, you know, you would do some attrition, you know, where you would hold units vacant elsewhere on Linden and Chambers or at seabeds to try to create the resources that you would need, you know, in-house to be able to accommodate residents, but that, or you would work to, you know, use the Section 8 mobile voucher program to help residents find temporarily housing in the private market. I think key always has been, in my experience, you know, offering anybody who needs to move away from Linden the opportunity to return to Linden once the work is complete if they want to. But the details of relocation is something that, you know, in Cambridge, we've had a tremendous experience with, have been able to work hard to really try to minimize, can't eliminate, but minimize the inconvenience and the hardship of relocation. And again, the Housing Authority, under both federal and state rules, have very stringent requirements in terms of providing, you know, movers and packing assistance and comparable units that would all be used and deployed to make sure that the residents are well taken care of and that everybody continues to have a safe, decent, and affordable unit throughout the construction period.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. I guess I was thinking mostly of, aren't there 2 buildings at Linden Chambers that are 2-story buildings with lots of units, like maybe 40 each or something? And
is it each unit
There are
has
5 buildings and each one has 16 units.
16
in them.
units, yeah.
5 buildings. These are the brick buildings we're speaking of, and each
Yes.
one has
16.
16. Oh, I didn't realize that. I had the idea, I was only in that building once. And my memory was there were 1 or 2 big buildings. Okay, now I understand how it might more easily be phased.
Yeah. But relocation and the strategy of relocation, I mean, it's funny. I think Reg and Angie very early on have been like really asking those same questions, because it really, you know, these are people's homes and you really have to be mindful of that, and you need to have a plan, because you know the strategy is not displacement, it's about improvement and preservation. And so, you know, it's something that both Reg and Angie have been asking about and focusing us on, you know, as you know, we have to. And again, that's been my experience with my work in Cambridge and with other housing authorities, is you got to continue to work with the residents you have and keep them in a safe, secure, affordable situation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I just want to add, so just the takeaway from that, Margaret, my understanding about your experience is that you have a great deal of experience within both Cambridge Housing Authority and I think actually in
I
Boston.
did High Rock, yeah.
Yeah, well, you actually did High Rock. I understand. I remember. But dealing with issues of relocation, that actually, I mean, and those housing authorities were large enough that they actually had, you know, set up staff that dealt with those issues. And you were, my recollection of your experience was that you were an integral part of that function in both Cambridge and in Boston at one time. So,
Yeah, and in other housing authorities.
And
as
other
well.
housing.
Yeah, I mean, I've done somehow I started doing relocation early in my career and have yet to leave it behind. Is the nature of the work.
all right, so let me go in order here. It's Artie Crocker.
Yeah, actually, Gene asked the exact question I was going to ask, so I just kept my hand up simply to say that, so I'm good.
Okay, and now Laura.
I apologize for the delay in that. I'm having trouble unmuting. So I was going to ask that same question, and thank you for addressing that, Jean and Margaret. But two questions on the relocation: is the cost of that's not obviously embedded in this request? That would be part of the actual development cost.
Yeah,
Okay.
as part of the development budget. This is pre-development expenses. So
Yes, thank you. And then one other question is, in consideration of this project where it's a redevelopment project, is there any thought being given to LEED or solar energy or any type of special environmentally safe kind of means of power and things like that? Is that part of?
yeah, I mean, in fact, the state, one of the requirements of getting state funding is to have all of the properties designed they have identified enterprise green communities as the kind of sustainability and resiliency standards. And in fact, the state just published in early December the tool that kind of describes the priorities that it uses to provide allocations of funding to various projects. It's called the Qualified Allocation Plan. And for the first time, they identified the enterprise green communities as the standard, and with a desire to try to, get projects to qualify for passive house and to be solar ready and to be much more mindful of energy efficiency and sustainability and green. And Cambridge adopted the enterprise green communities as a standard in 2010. So we have a lot of experience in kind of implementing those standards in multifamily housing. And we really applaud DHCD for selecting those, because we think that that's a much better standard for multifamily housing. You see results in amazing ways. We've been able to really transform the energy profile in Cambridge by following the standards and really pursuing a much greener building technology and the like. And we're moving forward with our first passive house project that we hope to start construction on later this year as well. So we're continuing to pursue the holy grail of environmental conscious housing.
Thank you.
Okay, and Joe Barnes, you had your hand up. You still have a question?
I did. I had two questions, both of which have been answered since the hand went up, so I will pass. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Any other questions regarding FY 2023-02, and that is schematic pre-development design of living chambers. All right, Reg, we're moving on to 2023-03. This is the purchase of East Militia Heights Drive property.
Okay, so I've got the screen share up there again. Hopefully everybody can see it. And found another typo just as I was looking at it here. So I'll fix that as I go along. This was not in the 2019 facilities master plan. This is a target of opportunity that has come up since it was completed and has been the subject of discussion within the town for several years in various quarters. In brief, when the Nike missile site was built in the mid-60s, there was a shortage of housing for military families. And so in the same time frame back there in the mid-60s, 12 three-bedroom bungalows were built on a 3.5 acre piece of property that's right across the street from the Charles River Center, if everybody knows where that is, or the North Hill complex. If you drive up East Militia Drive and just as you go by Charles River Center, you look left, there it is. The bungalows or cottages are very similar to what we already have in the High Rock Homes area, High Rock Estates area. The Army, the federal government, in doing a disposal of surplus property, puts out hundreds of pages of diligence documents. It's all in a database that's been available to us. And based on analyzing that, but we have not gotten inside those units, they do appear to be immediately usable as deeply affordable housing by the Needham Housing Authority, even in their as-is condition, but to be confirmed. Now, the enabling legislation in the 2018 Defense Authorization Act, rather than doing the normal thing, which is to tell HUD, Housing Urban Development, that this property is surplus, and then HUD has a whole process to see if anybody wants to acquire it locally or at the state level for affordable housing or other sort of nonprofit organization uses. The specific enabling legislation, which I've quoted there, says it has to be sold at fair market value. And there's some backstory of why that is, but it's basically a done deal. We've done a fair amount of outreach to our federal representatives, Representative Claus's office, our senators, and also other things, to see if we could somehow get that overturned and acquire the property for $10. But that has several attempts to do that has failed. There are other parties potentially interested in acquiring that property that have been part of this group that has been watching this property along with the town of Needham. And that includes Babson College, which is adjacent, and also the facility, the development was already originally built by taking property by eminent domain from Babson. And in years past, they've expressed some interest that has not been become fully concrete at perhaps reacquiring it and adding it back to their inventory of campus property. The second party, as I mentioned briefly in the application, is the Charles River Center. And I really can't speak for them, although I'm mentioning their potential interest with their permission, because I want, we all want the CPC to know that. And of course, the third possible interested party, or one or more of them, it would be private developers. A 3.5 acre property developed in the current housing, large housing development sort of mania that's going on in Needham for the last few years. That property could potentially be something that's very attractive to a private developer who might be interested in submitting a market value bid for that. Why is the Needham Housing Authority potentially interested in this? Well, there's really three reasons. One is there is a potential immediate use for 12 more units of deeply affordable housing in Needham. And we all know that there's a huge lack of affordable family housing in Needham, not only at the deeply affordable level, but at any income level in Needham these days. The second and medium term use conceptually is to be, I use the term swing space because it's a sort of a school use. It provides 12 units that we could use in redeveloping, say, High Rock Estates. We could move 12 families with their consent and permission, and with maybe them having the right to move back into the redeveloped units, but on a voluntary basis, we could move them into these 12 units, which are, close to the same neighborhood, not exactly close, but it's not that far away. And then move them back into the redeveloped High Rock homes, duplexes, and sort of do 12 units at a time that way. And the third and longer term use is that we could add this property, the 3.5 acres, to our overall redevelopment plan. So ultimately, more unit, you might be able to redevelop that in a very attractive way, let's say to 24 units. And that would also add to the inventory of deeply affordable housing. One issue that we have been doing some thinking about is it's not just a question of acquiring the bricks and mortar or the studs and wood frame in this case, but the families that live in our housing, the going rate for a 3-bedroom single family house like that in Needham, market rate is somewhere like on the order of $3,000 a month rent. And our residents, one of the benefits is that they don't have to pay more than 30% of their income on housing. So we would have a gap of about $1,500 per unit per month times 12 that we would have to find additional federal subsidy dollars for. And there's some strategies for doing that we're thinking about right now. I've said before, and I'll say again, that 1.5 million in the application is a placeholder. It is based on the market sale of a comparable piece of property in the nearby neighborhood, about 3.5 acres. But some parties have estimated it could be worth, on a fair market value basis, maybe $3 million, the way things have been going here in Needham the last 3 to 5 years. We are getting formal property appraisal done. It's in the works right now, and we expect to have that report in February 2022. So we have some real information on a professional basis as to what fair market value is. And that is going to be a factor, I think, in the committee's decision as to whether this is a worthwhile use of CPA funds, not only at the committee level, but I'm sure at the FinCom level, at the select board level, and ultimately, if we get there, at the town meeting level. So that's a bit of a work in progress. I have the questions here, which I'll come back to, but I put in the packet. These actually came from the diligence materials that the federal government has put out here. This one here is a sort of aerial view that sort of shows you the relationship of the property, which is down here in this bottom area here. This is North Hill. Over here is where the Charles River Center complex is. This is East Militia Heights Drive that goes all the way around here and circles all the way back and empties out on this road. I can't remember the name of it. That goes by Valente Farms here. Here's a closer up aerial view of the property showing you the layout of the 12 3-bedroom bungalows. They're all built to pretty much the same design. We have floor plans for all of these. They've all been checked for asbestos and other things, and it's in the several hundred pages of reports there. Here's a picture of what they look like, ground level, 2 of them. They all more or less look like this with carports. So the questions that, project-specific questions that came up here, I already answered the first one, which is the basis for the 1.5 million. And I answered at a high level the second question here. The third question is, has there been any discussion with DHCD and or HUD requiring this acquisition? And the answer is we're just going to be opening up that door this month or early next month. And so we don't have anything to report on with respect to that. And then is there additional funding requests, funding support for the acquisition available from DHCD? The answer is for the acquisition, no. Now, there isn't $1 million coming from somewhere or $3 million to buy this at fair market value. There is funding, which is a different question, but we answered, that we're looking into for the month-to-month, year-to-year operating subsidy we need in order to operate the properties as deeply affordable housing. So Peter, I think back to you. I think that's the presentation Q&A, I guess.
Okay, so let's open it up to the committee. And we'll just continue with our first hand up goes. And it is Jean McKnight. Jean, mute. You have to unmute.
Muted. There we go. The plans that were shown are interesting, that come from the federal, I guess, RFP. Do each of the houses front on East Militia Way, a public way, or East Militia Heights a public way, or is that a driveway off East Militia Heights?
It's a driveway. I'll put the picture up here again here. Whoops, I have the wrong one here. Let's try that again. This one. So it's a driveway off of it right here.
I see.
And this is East Militia Heights Drive. And if we go back down here, the pull out here, this starts at Central Ave. This is Central Ave going up here. This is Volante Farms here. This is North Hills. And this is East Militia Drive in this sort of right away here shown in the red that circles around the North Hill property.
Okay. I only asked that question because it affects development rights and what would have to be done in planning and zoning wise. It does make it a little more complicated than if it were each house on a public way.
Well, and one of the things I forgot to mention, not only are we having an appraiser look at this and give us a formal official report on the value, but we're also doing the title work to figure out what the development if there are any development easements or constraints or restrictions in the titles on that property. And of course, the appraiser will take into account what you can do by right and what would require some sort of zoning relief when they figure out the highest and best use of the property and what the fair market value is.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize the appraiser would do that. That's good. You need that. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, Laura.
So I don't know why that's happening to me. We talked about this a little bit before, Reg, but is there how do we get some sort of protection for this? I'm just worried that when it goes on the market, a developer is going to offer a lot more money. And I just don't see how, if this can be a fair market transaction, I just don't see how, without any kind of deed restrictions or any kind of help from the government, how we'll ever get this property. I don't understand how it could work at 1.5 million if it's going to be a fair market transaction. I think it's going to.
No, it might need. We may get these reports back in February and says the fair market value is 3 million.
Okay.
And then the decision is going to be: do we want to amend this application, to increase it? Is that the right use of our limited CPC funds? And remember, this is not, we have other aspirations for CPA funding. for the projects we've already gone over a bit before now. So I think that's, on the other hand, there has been talk of there being easements and deed restrictions that would prevent development, or issues with East Malicious Heights Drive being a private way, whereby you cannot by right develop I'll just, three, 8,000 foot, mansions on that 3.5 acres of property. There may be zoning issues. It's an odd piece of property in an odd location. Gene McKnight and I had a chance to talk briefly about it. Whatever you do there may require changes in zoning from town meeting, which may be enough to scare away developers. We don't know. But what we do know is that, we're getting more data, and we'll have that more data in February in time to consider it further before I think we get to the public hearing in March.
Thank you.
Artie Crocker, do you have a question?
Falling into the same category of how do we get the property? Is there any contingent that can go in there as far as right of first refusal? I mean, do we even remotely know that now at this point? Is that just too soon to know? What do we know about that?
So as we understand the Army procurement regulations for, disposing of surplus property at fair market value, the answer is there's no contingency. What they in brief, the process is they'll put out a big fat RFP, and a 60-day clock period, when all parties can come in and do their due diligence. And then you submit a sealed bid for what you are willing to pay for it. One from us, one from Babson, one from the Charles River Center. I don't think we should be doing that. I don't think we should be competing against each other, in my opinion as one commissioner on the board. But you certainly could get 2 or 3 bids from developers, the way things have been going. And then they open the bids, and and by the way, this is a cash offer. You basically, if they accept your bid, you have to pony up the money, right away. So, so we may win or lose, but there's no right of first refusal or way to negotiate beyond submitting the bid that I know of.
Okay, we have a question from Chris Gersel.
Thank you. Hopefully this is an easy question. You put the money in and we don't get the bid. I take it the money comes back to the CPC?
Yes.
Okay. Just want to make sure.
Good question, though.
But that's really a question for our staff, but yes, I mean, if it's going to come back, it's not.
You would not expect to keep it. Let's put it that way.
So, any other questions? So if we do, you may have answered this in question 3, that as part of those due diligence questions, but if there is an acquisition, is there an opportunity to, for lack of a better term, to unlock the equity in the property through these and redevelop it the way you're proposing to do it in terms of repositioning the other federal properties? Is there some?
I'm going to take a first crack at that and send it to Margaret here, but the NHA board and myself had not looked at it that way. What unlocks the value of the property and the other federal properties is they're already federal properties to begin with, and we own that land outright. So many people don't know it, but we own 42 acres in Needham. That's like brown gold, the way things are going these days. So we own the buildings, and that sort of thing. So we have the right to do this repositioning from program A to program B, C, D, or E, or some combination of those. So that's what creates the additional financial resources. Margaret, is there anything you would add to that?
I mean, it just, it's just a unique opportunity and one of few that would, presents itself for expanding affordable housing or land that's dedicated to affordable housing. And so, then you would look to try to maximize the value by, I think short term, as Reg said, you would keep it as is, but then you would look to try to do, potentially more to have it be more effective than just serving 10 or 12 families. But
So you wouldn't really be restricted to, if you owned it outright and you weren't subject to any kind of security agreement, if you will, between the Housing Authority and DHCD or the Housing Authority and HUD, then you're kind of free to develop it in any number of ways, right? So housing authorities, so it could just be a different kind of program, and you could be unlocking the equity and you could be developing it in a different way, right?
Yeah.
But there's no real plan on doing that. I mean, you're not at that stage yet.
Yeah, there's opportunity, not plan.
Opportunity, not plan, and there is some short-term view of what we could do with those bungalows as they exist presently,
That
right?
would be a valuable resource. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Can I answer your question in a different sort of way, Peter, which I think is important to get out on the table tonight for further thought over the next couple of months? I have been approached by people I will call leaders in this town, solid leaders in this town, who approach me and say, this is a no-brainer. Absolutely, the town doesn't have enough deeply affordable housing. And if the town has an opportunity to get 12 more units, no brainer, we should be using CPA funds to do that, even if you have to pay fair market value. That is the right thing to do. And I have had other town leaders who, are really that, who say, I don't know if this is the right thing to do with town CPA funds or any other kind of town funds, because CPA funds are not conceivably the only funds that could be used. That's not the business, that's not the highest and best use of our limited town funds. And so, by putting this application in, I think there's going to be a lot more discussion between those two sets of respectable town leaders who have very different points of view on this subject.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. Now, why don't we now turn to FY 2023-04, and this is for the request by the Housing Authority for funding for an assistant executive director position.
So I think this is probably the simplest of our applications before you tonight. The starting back in 2018, when we were getting going on the facilities management plan, master plan, and continuing with the hiring of the Cambridge Housing Authority, there's been a recognition by the board that if we do start down this path we started down 6 months ago for the next few years, particularly early on, there's going to be a very significant additional workload placed on our leadership team at the Housing Authority, which consists of Angie Medeiros, and we don't have an assistant executive director. And there are a number of things that have already started to happen and have been growing that require her decision, her involvement, her analysis, her attention, and so forth and so on. And the recommendation is that we should build into our plan, if we choose to go forward this way, an additional assistant executive director position. And so that's what you have before us. It's been a strong recommendation. We did some analysis and determined what the market rate seems to be for hiring a position of this type. We have, there was a question, and we've provided to the liaisons the position description. The timing in the questions, the timing of this is last August, the board authorized Angie Medeiros to start a search for the person, perhaps bringing that person on a half-time basis. Like everything else, finding good qualified people to fill positions in this area of human endeavor is very difficult. And the pandemic and all the other factors haven't made it any easier. And we are actively looking right now and interviewing candidates, but we still haven't landed on anybody yet. So the second question is their job description? Yes. The third, and I, by the way, put the job description in the answer in the way back in Appendix F. There's a copy of the job description if you didn't get that far. And then the third question is, well, isn't this just duplicative of the responsibilities being handled by the Cambridge Housing Authority? And the simple answer is no, it is not. This is to keep the day-to-day management operations going at the Housing Authority while we go down this path for the next few years. We've asked for 2 years of funding because we think after the second year, we'll be able to build the cost of this position into our budgets on an ongoing basis as we begin to attract the kind of funds in to actually do this work. For example, describe the repositioning projects where we're going to be getting $1 million more, knock on wood, of annual subsidy funding, and so we would be able to cover the cost ourselves once we make that transition. That is this application. And Margaret, I'm going to ask you if you wouldn't weigh in a little bit more about on this question. Why is it that we're not just hiring somebody who should be doing what you guys should be doing here?
Well, we're hard to find, but it's very specialized work to pull together the kind of complex financing that these affordable housing deals require. You really, it's hard to find the right complement of a person who can check off all the boxes. So even if you had somebody who had some experience, they wouldn't have the depth of resource or the time to be able to do it, because it's more than one person job to kind of put together the financing. But Angie's a key part of the team, because we need Angie at the local level to be able to, foster the relationships, and Reg, for that matter, using his last name, foster the relationships with all of the town officials and to make the decisions. I mean, we will outline options and opportunities, but it's the Housing Authority through Angie and the Housing Authority Board that has the biggest task, which is making the decisions and making the determinations that are best for the operations of the Housing Authority and for the community. And having Angie freed up to be able to have the ability to dive in and understand the choices, so that she's able to guide the board and guide the agency as it moves through this really wonderful opportunity to transform and expand. It's a different. She can't run her day-to-day job and kind of play the role of a leader of the agency doing transformation without somebody who is, as we like to say, keeping the trains running on time and making sure that the bills are paid, again, under her supervision. She doesn't lose that responsibility, but she just needs to be able to lean in and lean on another executive position that would help the Housing Authority through this challenging time. But it is, very few housing authorities have the resources to pay for the kind of skill set that my team at the Housing Authority has. And we've spent 20 years actually building our capacity and building our reputation. And we're one of the few housing authorities nationally that actually do their own self-development. A lot of housing authorities will contract out to a private developer or either a for-profit or a nonprofit, but in doing so, they then lose some of their local flavor because the private developer takes on not only the development activity, but then typically wants to be the property manager and maintenance provider going forward. It basically pushes the housing authority to the side. And I know, that's a path some have to take because there's no other choice. But, we've been trying to offer some of the local housing authorities a choice to strengthen their operations with some assistance from, again, the incredible team that I have at the Housing Authority through the efforts that we've been doing for the last 20 years.
Okay, so question, Jean McKnight.
Yes, I'm glad for your explanation because I think I came in with a misunderstanding of what the assistant director would be doing. I thought that this assistant director was going to be the, sort of the local person, taking the lead on this modernization and redevelopment initiative. But I think now I understand that will be the director, Angie Medeiros' responsibility. And in order for her to be able to do that and have the time and energy to do that, the day-to-day responsibilities of the director need to be shared with an assistant director under Angie's supervision. Have I got that right, Ms. Medeiros? Yes, so thank you. I understand better what's proposed here.
Okay, and now Rick Zimbone, his hand is up.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. This is really kind of a question to be anticipated. In the past, when these types of positions have been proposed for either, not necessarily for CPA funds, but for town funding under various buckets, the finance committee has typically stepped up and said, well, why should, for example, in this case, why should half the salary and half the benefits come out of CPA funds and not just out of, in prior situations, town funds, or in this case, the Needham Housing Authority funds. And I just think it would be prudent as we're looking at this and going to have to address this question. I'm sure it'll come from the finance committee as to why should it be coming out of CPA funds and not the whole package come out of the Housing Authority budget. So I don't need an answer. I'm just prepping for an anticipated question down the road.
Okay.
So just to point out, Rick, you recall that we did fund Karen Sonnenberg's position for at 50% for a period of 24 months. So there's, and she was our Needham Housing Authority, Affordable Housing Authority director for the town. So there's some precedent for that. So I mean, this question's been kind of dealt with and addressed, and there's a little bit of a worn path on the question.
Yeah, I not to disagree with you, Peter, but I was on the other side of that discussion when it occurred because I was a member of the finance committee. And although it was done so reluctantly, let's put it that way. There was an agreement reached, but it was done so reluctantly. And I just think that's something that we just need to be prepared for, because I don't think the folks in the finance committee, they're going to want to examine it again. Let's put it that way.
I also think that it's a question that will come on the floor of town meeting, right?
Sure.
And so we always want to think about the questions that are going to be heard on town meeting. But that's definitely a town meeting question. Joe Barnes.
Just a quick question. Reg indicated the challenge in trying to find a candidate that would meet the criteria or have the background to handle a job like this. I'm wondering, with the Cambridge Housing Authority been in business for such a long time, could they become a resource? Do they run across candidates that may be helpful to us? Maybe could become candidates that we might be able to interview and maybe bring our way?
I think we're having the same trouble you're having right now, which is trying to find people to fill positions that we have as well. I mean, we have it's been a challenging time, I think, across many industries in terms of trying. We don't do staff recruitment per se. I mean, we use some of the same tools that Needham Housing Authority has. And if a candidate is good, they've probably already been hired if they've applied to the Cambridge Housing Authority job, and we probably wouldn't let them go to Needham. If they asked, they could go on their own volition. But if we had, obviously, if we had somebody who was ready for a promotion and there wasn't an opportunity within Cambridge, we would be certainly encouraging that person to apply to a Needham Housing Authority job, but or any job. But we really strive to keep our staff with us and give them opportunity for advancement and promotion as well. So, but if we have, I did say to Reg, I was going to ask our director of operations if he had somebody in mind. But I think it's just tough market right now. There's a lot of people are either, we have a number of positions that we haven't been able to fill within our operations department, and a number of people who are leaving that are, people who've been with the Housing Authority for a long period of time. That it's just been surprising to me that they're moving on or are moving home.
I would add to that, and the younger folk don't seem to be getting into this area. We should recognize we are small, but we're very complex. We're very complex housing authority. We have 3 separate programs. We have the state program with its own set of regulations and legislation, and DHCD micromanaging us, hopefully most days in a good way. We have the feds and HUD and their regulations. They all covers the same thing, but they're different. Everything is different, from the leases you use to the regulations you have to apply and so forth and so on in every respect. And then we have a third housing program. We have a Section 8 voucher program with 120 Section 8 vouchers that Angie, one of the great accomplishments last year that Angie did is to take it in-house back from the Dedham Housing Authority, where it had been for 10 or more years, and which was very financially beneficial for us just right off the bat on a day-to-day funding point of view, of not having to pay Dedham to do it, number one. And then it really opens up new doors and avenues for Margaret and Natalie and the team. Having your own control over your Section 8 vouchers is really important. But those are sort of 3 separate skill sets. And we're not, Cambridge, we're not the Worcester Housing Authority or the Fall River Housing Authority, 2 places that Angie's worked before. And fortunately, Angie has got the skill set as a single person to oversee all of those things at the same time. And we need a deputy Angie, an assistant Angie, who, well, while they might not know all of it, they need to know at least some of it in order to shoulder the load and relieve the load off of our executive director.
Additional questions? All right. Well, I just want to remind the committee that actually one thing that Rick has told me maybe offline is that he likes to use these presentations as an opportunity to kind of noodle through that proposed grant and come up with additional questions. So I know, and I've got a I've got a little sidebar list here of some questions that I'm probably going to pose to the proponents in written form. And I would just encourage the committee to do that as well, because we have some time in front of us before we have to vote. So if you have additional questions, put them in written form, forward them to Cecilia, and she will forward them to the proponents. Okay. And I just my understanding, just in terms of additional information that Reg is going to provide to us, is we've got a timeline that he's going to be putting together, and then further pondering and coming up with the issue of a contingency. That's what I have on my list. All right. So if anyone has anything else, let speak up, and then otherwise put your questions in written form, forward them to Cecilia. And any other questions or comments? Okay, so I want to, first of all, I want to thank Reg for the presentation, and Angie and Margaret and Natalie for coming here tonight. And appreciate all the information that you provided. And I also want to acknowledge that the Housing Authority, this is a very ambitious plan. The timing is great. I really admire the work that has been done even to date. And so congratulations on that. Thank you for the work that you've done on behalf of our town to date. Thank you very, very much. Thank you for, I know the amount of work that goes into it, both for staff and for volunteers. So thanks a lot, right? Terrific work as of today. And so let's just be optimistic that we can be helpful going forward. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, good.
Can we let
Okay.
our guests go maybe at this point?
Pardon me?
Can we let our guests go?
Yes, yes, guests, please enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you for
Thank
your
you so much.
patience.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night. Okay, the rest of our agenda, I think we can go through pretty quickly. Review of our due diligence questions. I think that Cecilia, what had in our prior meeting, we had a discussion about due diligence questions and we had a deadline for putting them together, and it looks like everyone has met that. Cecilia put together some additional questions. I think she on the standard project specific questions that people would come up with. And I think that there was a request by one member, I think it was by Rick, to circulate those questions. I don't know that the PDF that I got is actually that document. It was a late request, but it doesn't, maybe I'm wrong.
Cecilia sent it out to
But
Peter.
I'm looking at it.
The PDF that I sent is questions for all 10 applications in order 1 through
Okay, I got it. You're right.
11,
Yes, I see it.
because
Okay, got it.
8's not an
I got it.
application.
So
Yeah.
okay, I get it. All right, so we do have those. So
I
my
thought that
thinking
was
on
very
this,
helpful. Thank you.
yeah, okay, so my thinking on this is they should go out, we've and send those out to the proponents. I don't know that we need to have any further discussion about it. If anybody, we don't need to kind of wordsmith the questions. If you have any additional questions, you can put them in an email and send them to Cecilia. They can make their way to the proponent in due course. But I think it's important to turn this stuff out and get this stuff out. So does that make sense to the committee? That's how we've done it in the past. Okay. We've
I
done.
have one suggestion based
Okay,
on
Reg, and then
having actually answered those. I actually answered all 4 of our sets of questions, which start off with the generic questions is what I'm calling them, and then at the very end have the specific questions. Would it be okay if before Cecilia sent them out, maybe she fills out the project number and the project title in the first page there, so you know what you're looking at. I know what I'm looking at because I've been part of the CPC here. But, you know, and I know you split them up, Cecilia, to individual proponents here, but I just think it would be easier to sort of keep track of everything with that little administrative change here. Maybe even put the CPC liaisons on the questionnaire before you send them out.
Yeah, so I can edit the versions that I've sent to this committee here, but the versions have already gone out to the individual applicants, but they were just for, like, each individual email was for one application only. So like Park and Rec got one for cricket field and one for the tennis court. So it was on the email for which project it was for. Just in case, I wanted to give them the opportunity in case any of their information, like I know in DPW at least the project contact has changed. So I wanted them to be able to fill out anything.
All right, so, but I think the goal would
Oh, I
be
see
to
what you
have,
mean.
at least when we're looking at the documents, when we just want the, when they provide us with the answers and the information, we want it tied to the actual, you know.
Oh yeah, definitely. I can do that for you guys. Yeah.
Okay, good, fine. All right. Does that answer your question and concern, Reg?
Sure.
Okay, all right, and then Laura, question.
I just want to, you know, kind of mention that Reg has already obviously done this, and we have already sent questions out to Walker Pond. So I just want to make sure that everyone's aware of that.
Oh yeah, okay. I think we are aware of that. And you and Laura, you are one who dug in real deep on the general questions and teased things out and then put in some specific questions. So you used all the tools available to you.
I certainly tried. Thank you.
Good. So remember, and you know, that's my compliment, my compliment.
You got one tonight too, didn't you?
Well, I worked hard for that. Didn't I?
You got
I mean,
that.
I had to tee that up.
And now it's recorded, Peter, for posterity.
That's right.
Yeah, but you know,
Everyone-
self-praise is no praise.
It wasn't, I thought it was very careful. It was not self-praise.
That's right.
It was a softball.
It was,
Yeah.
okay.
Actually, you just made me think of one more thing to say about answering the questions that I did. I just unilaterally did. And again, probably nobody had a chance to get to those appendices, but there are two questions about how does the, you know, I'm paraphrasing roughly, how does your application fit the general criteria of the CPA plan? And there's a second question that says, how does it fit the specific criteria of the housing section of the CPA plan, in my case? And when I started to try to answer those, it just became a lot easier. And so I just cut and paste the actual bullet point criteria for each of those two categories there, and then answered each one. And it was really helpful for me to just have a structured way of you know, checking each box that's important, or saying that's not applicable, or I don't meet it at all, with, you know, as the case may be. And you might want to take a look at how I did that as a possible way of improving the application for next year, if not for this year.
Right. So yeah, I think I used to put in, how does it fit within the subjective factors of housing, and then I just ended up referring them back to the plan. So one thing that's to say, Celia and I have been talking about this offline, and one thing that you did point out was this: we were making this kind of rebuilding the question due diligence format as we were going along, and so it'll go a lot smoother next year, right? We've been through it where we rebuilt it as we're you know, driving down the road. So that's a good point, Reg. And then any other thoughts on that? We should be offering, everybody should be offering those, but that's a good point. Okay, so is it any other questions or comments? I just want to make sure I've covered everyone. Okay. So so those are out. I think the most important thing is we need to address, Cecilia and I have been working offline here on the question of our schedule. And we had a really good draft schedule going. But there are a number of factors at play to try to fit all the players in at the proposed times. So let's just deal with this. Let's deal with it one meeting at a time, if you will. And what we had proposed for the 26th, which is in 2 weeks, was the presentation by Emery Grover, by Needham Public Schools and Emery Grover. And we had also filled it out with Needham Community Farm. And I think with the idea of our next meeting on the 9th, having basically the park and rec proposals up on the 9th. So Joe Lacorn has pleaded for a date other than the 26th. Joe is going to be presenting on behalf of the community farm, and so I think that we should answer his plea and grant his request. And so if we put Needham Community Farms on for the 9th, I guess, or even the 23rd of February, that could be. The question is there anyone, we only have Emery Grover for the 26th, kind of dealing with this online with Cecilia, but I'm wondering if we can move one of those other park and rec presentations, either cricket field, tennis courts, boat launch, or Walker Pond. I think Walker Pond is not a great one for the 26th, but one of the first three.
I know we can't move the boat launch. We are looking to go in front of the conservation committee before we go in front of CPC.
Okay, and the reason I'm bringing this up in front of the committee members is because we've got liaisons involved here, and we got questions that are just going out. So I guess then is it possible for us to think about cricket field or the tennis courts being presented on the 26th? So that I'm trying to kind of even out our work. Looks like we can get things. So is that a possibility? Yes, Jean.
I want to make sure that members of the committee are aware that the select board is having an executive session on the night of the 26th. It's going to be at the town hall, and it's only going to be in person and at Powers Hall. And this is an executive session to consider the purchase of real property. And I assume, and maybe it's already been put out, that the real property in question is the Foster property off Charles River Street. And has the town manager or the select board specifically asked the CPC if they wish to be present at that meeting, Peter?
Yeah, so actually the public statement is that there's some discussions with the owners of that property concerning the potential purchase. And there's an executive session scheduled for January 26th. I'm glad you brought it up. It is scheduled to begin at 5 p.m. And
5:30.
Okay, thank you, 5:30.
Yeah.
But I think that FinCom is scheduled to meet at 7. And if there is any conflict, I think that they've assured me that they're going to end by 7. But if there's any conflict, then we'll just start on the 26th at 7:30. And yes, I, as the chair of I've been invited to that meeting, and thank you for bringing that up. And it is an executive session.
So I would be there with the planning board. And as far as the extension of invitations, it's only to you personally as chair, Peter?
It's to me as chair, yes.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, yes.
Peter, are they going to be, excuse me, it's Rick. Are they going to be looking for us to do any funding for this particular parcel?
There hasn't been any request, right? And I guess the answer is, I don't know, and I don't think so.
Okay.
There is a placeholder in place.
Well, I know, but depending upon the estimate and things that aren't public yet, And if they come to us looking for money, we have to factor that into our financial plan.
I think that we're gonna have plenty of time to do that, right?
Okay,
Yes,
all right.
right, and right, but that's obviously a question, right? That's an active question, but I'll let you know that. in due
Well, I guess, yeah, Pete, I guess the active question is also, there's so much we don't know about it. And if there would even be time for the CPC to act upon anything, obviously it has to come to a vote. But I don't know the timing of any of this. We don't know the timing of any of this. But we don't know, it's not always up to us at all of when this
Right.
would have to be acted upon. We don't
Right.
know. We don't know at all.
Well, so all of this information that has been discussed, anything that's been discussed to date has been discussed in executive session. And there's I pretty much repeated verbatim what I understand is the only public statement that should be made regarding it, which is that there are discussions between the town and the owners of the property. And then we're going to have additional executive session on the 26th. I would assume that there is going to be some limitation on what the disclosures that can be made coming out of that. So I guess we could, I'll think about this, but we may want to, potentially could be putting some information out under chairman's updates, but we'll see how that goes. Okay, so those are good questions, and what I'm required to do is to just honor my obligations under the law. And so we'll make the disclosures that are appropriate at the time. But I think that what the message that I'm getting back from this committee is, well, we're serious about our work and we need time to consider things, including, is there going to be a request for funding made? And if so, how much? Because we are also pretty careful about what our financial planning is for this committee. Is that fair to say, Rick and Artie?
Yes.
Yeah, and this really wasn't intended to flush out questions, just to kind of highlight the fact that you're going for an obvious reason. And if in fact you're going and someone's going to be putting a request in for funding, we just need to be aware of it with as much advance time as possible.
I don't know that I wouldn't make an assumption that that's why I'm being invited.
Okay.
It may be me saying, I think that we should be invited, don't you think? And
that's fine. Yeah.
It may, but no, but that's good. But I respect both of your comments. They're really helpful. They are. So, all right, Jean, you had your hand up.
I know that a placeholder application is before us, fiscal year 23-12, for the appropriation of $1 million for preservation of open space, purchase of land. And so that may be relevant to what we're talking about. I don't know.
So Jean, that placeholder, that application is done every year and as a placeholder. And so, in case something happens quickly. And so we may be faced with that. We may be faced with that, right?
I see.
Okay.
So,
all right.
All right. Yeah. I can find out history and how things work later. That's okay.
Okay. All right. All right. So schedule for future meetings. All right. So let's deal with this. Now we got a little sidetracked there. So now next meeting, what I want to do is deal with the agenda. Now, I guess you could give me some flexibility on this, but right now we've got Emery Grove, and it would be nice to get at least one other a proponent in here so we can make an efficient use of our time. Why don't we just leave it at that? We're going to try to figure that out. It's going to be potentially likely one of the park and rec. And then we'll be in touch with, we being Cecilia and I will be in touch with the proponents, with the liaisons about that. And so you'll be aware. Okay, does that make sense to everybody?
I have one question or comment or something, which is, I reached out 2.5 weeks ago to try to meet with a proponent, and cricket since then. So we would have been ready by the 26th, except apparently there's nobody who feels that they need to respond whatsoever here. So maybe I don't know what you do when you have a proponent that doesn't propone when they should here. If that's-
Okay, so
Reg, I'll reach out to the proponent and make sure that she gets back to you. I think it must be a little lost in translation. She is very good about getting
not
back to
her.
people. So
It's an engineer, some engineer who's standing in for now I'm blocking his name, but
Tony Delgado.
Oh,
yeah,
yes.
Tony that died. So
Okay.
Cecilia
Okay.
gave me the replacement proponent and nothing back here.
okay, so why don't we do this? This is how we normally do this, which is, okay, Cecilia, we're not hearing from this proponent. Let's ping them.
Yeah.
We,
I'm back in the office on Tuesday, and I'll find him in person and ask him to respond. That'll
Okay,
be the best
maybe.
option.
yeah, and it may be that is that the boat launch?
Yeah.
It
Yes.
is, right? But the boat launch has to go before the Conservation Commission. Did someone just say that earlier? Okay, so that boat
Yeah.
launch.
Yeah, we're working with Chris.
Okay, so well, all right, we're gonna work on the presentations for the 26th and the 9th, and we're gonna rejigger them a little bit. And we have, I'm looking down at my phone here. We got a draft schedule, and we'll get this out to you soon. Okay, so we've got our kind of plan going forward through April 1, and so we'll get. I think Cecilia will be able to finalize this, or at least put it in, making it into a working document, so that we can send it out to the committee when you get back next week. How's that sound? Good. All right.
Yeah.
All right. All right. So there. That's meeting minutes. I don't think we have any. Do we, Kristen? Okay. Any other issues? Oh, one other issue, and this should have been under chairman's updates, and it would have been 2 meetings in a row that I forgot. Cheryl, when in the materials that I had sent you for community preservation, the Community Preservation Alliance newsletter from our last meeting, I wanted to bring everyone's attention to the fact that based on the Governor Baker's supplemental budget, improving the supplemental budget, there's going to be an additional something like, I don't know, $160,000 we calculated coming to the town of Needham, or we anticipate. But also in that newsletter was something else I wanted to bring to your attention, was that now our own Needham's own Cheryl Gossman is on the steering committee, right, for the Community Preservation Alliance. So statewide organization. Cheryl's and for those of you who don't know, Cheryl's was a longtime commissioner of the Needham Housing Authority, longtime employee, I believe, of the Needham Public Schools, longtime recording secretary for the senior council. Is it the Council on Aging? I believe that's what it is. But she's had various positions in our town and served our town really well. And it's fantastic to have somebody who's really dedicated to our town be in that position. So I just wanted to note that to you, and if Cheryl's listening, give her a shout out. I think she's now acting as the recording secretary for the Needham Housing Authority Commissioners meetings. Is that correct, Reg?
That's right.
Okay, so good. All right, that's it. That's it for me. Any other comments or questions? All right, hearing none. Okay, we'll move to adjourn. That's made by Mr. Dermody. Second, Chris Gersel. And let's have our one and only roll call vote this evening. Mr. Barnes.
Yes.
Crocker.
Aye.
Dermody.
Approve.
Dorfman.
Yes.
Foster.
Aye.
Aye.
Gersel.
Aye.
McKnight.
Aye.
Zimbone.
Yes, and everybody stay healthy and safe.
Okay, and the chair votes
Likewise.
aye. Thank you
Thanks,
very much. You
Cecilia and
guys are
Kristen,
great.
as always.
And can I just say,
Right.
Reg, you did a really good job with all of that. That's a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah, Reg, I was wondering, like, if we were going to be here until midnight, when, and it's because of the complexity of the problem and the breadth of your request. And you did a good job. Okay,
Thank
you did.
I
You really did a
appreciate
good
it.
job. All right.
And thanks to my liaisons as well. It's it was a very helpful meeting the other day to have a dress rehearsal,
You're
so.
a tough act to follow, Reg.
Well, I'm
Hey,
glad
Reg,
we
are you
got it out
speaking
of the
French
way.
there?
I know the accent. I love the accent.
Yeah,
I
you
do
speaking
too. It makes us
French?
sound, we're fancy, right, Chris?
Liaison.
Well,
All right, well, bonne nuit.
Yeah.
bon nuit.
Garçon.
Goodbye. Good night.
Thank
Au
you.
revoir.
Bye.